Tonight on Bridge City News, Alberta's Justice Minister was in Lethbridge today with an announcement on how the province is going to help combat drug crime in our city. Members of a humanitarian organization in Medicine Hat are being detained in Ethiopia. We will explain why. And we hear from a Wet'suwet'en hereditary chief who says an agreement has been reached with the government in regards to controversy surrounding the GasLink pipeline project in BC.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. A group of 15 members of the Medicine Hat organization known as Canadian Humanitarian have been detained in Ethiopia over allegations of practicing medicine without permission and using expired medication. The group denies the allegations. The organization consists of 10 Canadian volunteers, 3 Canadian staff members, and 2 Ethiopian members. Global Affairs Canada says they are aware of the Canadians who have been detained and are working to gather more information. The government says consular services are being provided to the Canadian citizens and their families. Canadian Humanitarian has sent hundreds of Canadian volunteers on humanitarian trips around the world since 2003. Alberta Justice Minister Doug Schweitzer was in Lethbridge earlier today to announce a 4-year investment of up to $20 million to help fight drug-related crimes in our city. The funds will see drug treatment courts expanded to 5 additional sites across the province.
Part of our commitment to $20 million over 4 years for drug treatment courts, Lethbridge will be the first community outside of Calgary and Edmonton to have a drug treatment court.
Where would we have been all those years ago if drug courts were available in Lethbridge? What if she would have been ordered to treatment and held accountable to stay sober?
One of the big things about drug treatment courts is that you look at the issues behind the addiction. Therefore, we work closely with psychologists, we work closely with psychiatrists to do assessments and individually assess where has this person's addiction started, is there trauma behind this addiction, and where can we take it from there?
The province says in Alberta, meth use has increased more than 300% between 2014 and 2018, and meth trafficking has increased by roughly 215% around the same time. Less than half of the population of Western Canada lives in major urban centres and has access to critical care within minutes. Now, for the other half, such access is measured in hours. BCN's Loris Alexander reports from Picture Butte, where Stars Air Ambulance thanked a local supporter who raised funds to fill in the gap between life and death.
I had a heart attack, and my family was able to get me to the hospital, and I had died along the way.
Seconds count. Getting quick medical attention for Clayton Orr made all the difference.
Stars was called to come down and to get me, and they came down and they hooked me up all on their equipment and everything, and airlifted me to the Foothills Hospital.
Thanks to the employees at Rocky Mountain Equipment in Picture Butte who raised funds for Stars Air Ambulance. For Clayton Orr, it meant a second chance at life.
When you say thank you, it just doesn't go far enough, because when you're talking about saving your life, the word just doesn't go.
We challenged all our branches across Western Canada to raise money for Stars this year, and Picture Butte was the branch that raised the most money.
Stars has a mobile education program in a large RV that visits rural communities in Alberta and BC.
What we do with our mobile education program is we provide education to rural physicians, nurses, paramedics, EMS, people in the frontline staff who with our high fidelity mannequin. So what we do there is we expose them to situations that they may not have seen or not have been into.
Meet Stan, the human patient stimulator that responds to procedures like CPR.
A lot of training we do is all hands-on. So this is a mannequin that you can actually, like I was saying, put a tube in his lungs to breathe for. You can actually do CPR on Stan. You can practice your intravenous skills. And not only that, you can practice your communications with your coworkers and how to actually treat and deal with some of Stan's issues.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
The Community Issues Committee met at Lethbridge City Hall earlier today. One of the items on the agenda was an update on the greenhouse gas reduction target of the city for waste and recycling and environmental sustainability.
It's good to hear too that council is going to think about raising the target too. That's something that we would love to see, but it's not something that we want to include in our target. We let them make that decision themselves. The main projects are the landfill gas capture system. So that's going to capture landfill gas that comes out of the landfill. That's usually methane. Methane is very toxic to the atmosphere. It's actually 25 to 28 times worse for the environment than carbon dioxide.
For more information on the committee, you can always visit the City of Lethbridge website. Alberta Labour and union groups organized rallies across the province over the weekend. They were protesting cuts in the most recent provincial budget. Now here in Lethbridge, around 100 demonstrators gathered outside of the provincial courthouse as NDP MLA Shannon Phillips tore a strip off the Kenney government.
This is a government whose real agenda is to cut and privatize your health care, to bring in American-style health care, to cut and privatize your education system, to cut and privatize your seniors' care.
So as grannies, we're here to show our support for the various unions, for the various people in healthcare, because as seniors, healthcare is important to us. We're really concerned about the cutbacks to the nurses. We're very concerned about the cutbacks in education, because those are our children and grandchildren that are affected, and therefore the future.
The province's elimination of a $500,000 grant for firefighter training will be greatly missed. Now that's according to the Alberta Fire Chiefs Association. A letter recently released by Minister of Municipal Affairs Casey Medew announced a cut to the entire amount of funding for firefighter training. The letter stated the move is in an effort to reduce operating costs and administrative burden. The Alberta Fire Chiefs Association was also informed the province cancelled the annual presentation of the Exemplary Service Medal Ceremony. That is where volunteer and career firefighters are honoured by the officials from the Government of Canada and Alberta for their service. It was a fun time for kids over the weekend at the West Side Crossings branch of the Lethbridge Public Library. The young ones gathered for the grand opening of the new toy library.
There has been access to Toy Library at the main branch since 1978, but never any access to toys here in West Lethbridge. So we're super excited to offer that to the community, and we anticipate that it will be well used and well loved by the community. The decision to build the Toy Library was an easy one because it was based on community need and community requests, so the community actually asked for a Toy Library here. So right now we have this initial collection, and so everything's full, but we know that it will get used and items will be kind of moved out of this collection as they're kind of used or their popularity wanes. We are accepting donations, and you can call ahead to the library and we'll put you in touch with the right person.
The Toy Library was made possible thanks to a $4,000 donation from the Friends of the Lethbridge Public Library and Fortis, Alberta. A Wet'suwet'en hereditary chief and senior government ministers say they've reached a proposed agreement in discussing a pipeline dispute that has prompted solidarity protests across Canada. No details of the agreement were released, saying it first has to be reviewed by the Wet'suwet'en people.
We're going to be continuing to look at some more conversations with BC and, of course, with the proponent, and to further our conversation with the RCMP out on the territory. It's not over yet. We're just looking at more work in that area. The other component that we worked on together was the rights and title matter. We come up with an arrangement that we seen as probable help and assistance to all parties, so that we can see the future as a better outlook for our occupation out on the land.
Protesters blocked entrances and streets to a mining convention in Toronto yesterday. Organizers said they were trying to raise awareness about the harmful impacts of resource extraction to the environment and Indigenous lands.
The world's largest mining convention is happening in this building right behind me, and Toronto is out here to disrupt it, to say your business as usual cannot be allowed to continue. We're standing up to the Canadian mining extractive industry's violence, colonization, land theft, and environmental destruction. This industry is leading us directly towards a planet that is literally unlivable, and we're here to stop that from happening. I think that this year it's become more more clear to more people that Canada not only was founded on the removal of Indigenous people from their land for resource extraction, but that is continuing every day.
Fracking. It's a term that can sometimes scare people. Hydraulic fracking is a technique in which rock is fractured using pressurized liquid. It creates cracks which allows natural gas and petroleum to flow more freely. Now, some say fracking can cause earthquakes. Robert Murphy is a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute, and he says he takes issue with that.
That term earthquake, I think, can be misleading, right? People have the idea that buildings are falling down. There has not been a single death in the United States attributed to an earthquake caused by fracking. Most of these things are very minor. In many cases, people might not even know that it happened. So they can detect it, but again, it's not as if, bridges are falling down. So I think the term earthquake might be misleading, but yes, strictly speaking, by pumping the water and down there, they can disturb some of the motion.
Catch the full interview with Robert Murphy and BCN's Paul Arthur discussing the pros and cons of fracking coming up after business news. The coronavirus has now killed more than 3,000 people and affected more than 80,000 others around the world. Most of the cases have been in China. BC just announced that it has its 8th case of COVID-19. It's a woman from Iran in her 60s who traveled to BC to visit family. The province's provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, says the woman has a mild case of the virus and is self-isolation at home, along with a small number of close contacts.
She's from Tehran, Iran, so this is another exported case from Iran. She is in the Vancouver Coastal Health Region. There's a very small number of close contacts and everybody is in isolation, so that's good. So she is in isolation at home with a relatively mild case, so we're thankful for that. The investigation is ongoing, but we don't expect to have very many contacts. She was doing the right thing and staying away from others, and certainly was assessed safely in our health system here.
There have also been 3 new cases in Ontario, and so far, no confirmed cases of the coronavirus here in Alberta. Meanwhile, south of the border, the U.S. has counted 80 cases of the virus so far, with 2 deaths. Both were men from Washington state who had existing health problems. Health officials say the virus may have been in Washington state undetected for weeks. Now, reaction to the disease south of the border has been mixed.
I mean, it's a disease. You need to pay attention to that.
I don't think we have enough cases yet to where I think we should panic.
We don't know how you get it. We have no protection against it. So that's something to worry about. Suddenly it alerts you that you need to take this seriously. They don't seem to be frightened yet, but I think a few more cases and we're going to begin to think about that.
If you're sick, stay home. If you have a temperature, stay home. If you need medical attention, get some medical attention.
U.S. President Donald Trump insists the U.S. is doing quite well as it deals with the spread of the coronavirus.
Working very hard with the CDC, with everybody on a subject that has become a very big subject. Our country's doing very well. Our professionals are doing really an incredible job. We're also working with other countries to help them because they really have a fear of the unknown. We're working very much with a lot of other countries including Colombia, but we're working with a lot of other countries on helping them with respect to this problem. And again, we're doing very well. Some additional people were reported. They're in good shape, but we have some additional people that were reported, not very many in the United States.
Intense heat, poisonous gas, and molten lava. Those are some of the conditions tightrope walker Nick Wallenda will have to endure while he attempts to walk across an active volcano in Nicaragua on Wednesday.
I had a vision of walking over a volcano, like I said, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe even before that. But then I start researching them on my own, going and looking at locations and then going, okay, well, this one might work, and then finding the one that is the best. Best is not what one would think. One would think best for a wire walker has to do with no winds, has to do with no gases. For me, that all adds drama and excitement. So I'm looking for that, but also the right distance. Again, this is the longest and highest I've ever done. That's one of the reasons why I really liked this particular volcano, as well as the fact that it has an active lava lake down below.
Apparently, Nick Wallenda is a believer. His walk takes on a whole different meaning, doesn't it? It was difficult to walk around the Windy City the past couple of days. Strong winds over 90 kilometers an hour. Fortunately, the wind warning has ended for our region, but there's a chance of some rain developing. Complete weather details are coming up. We had lots of cloud cover and mild again today. Now there's a chance of some shower activity developing. Jeanette Rocher is here now and has all of the details. Jeanette?
Yeah, definitely some shower activity beginning tonight. Actually, we do have a 30% chance of showers this evening, and also wind gusting to 90 kilometers per hour. Tomorrow morning, expect those wind gusts to continue, and then they're going to diminish to 70 kilometers per hour. The overnight low tonight is 3 degrees, and then into tomorrow, we're going to see some double digits with 11 degrees. And then we do have a chance of showers again on Wednesday with a high of 5, high of 10 degrees on Thursday. Sunny days for Thursday and Friday with a high of possibly reaching up to the teens with 13 degrees on Friday. But then there is a chance of rains beginning on Friday night. It's going to turn into flurries for Saturday and Sunday. We have very high possibilities of snow for this weekend. So there you go. We're kind of all over the place. The average high is 4 degrees. The average low is -9. We're kind of in that range there. 17 degrees was the high temperature on this day in 1994. And back in 1960, it was a chilly -35. The sun rose at 7:11 a.m. and it set at 6:15 p.m. Showers are expected tomorrow on the west coast for Victoria and Vancouver with highs of 10 and 8 degrees there. A high of 7 degrees expected in Edmonton, and they are looking at some flurry activity. Not in Calgary though. They're going to be seeing lots of sunshine tomorrow with a high of 9 degrees. And then over into Saskatchewan, we have a mix of rain turning to snow in Regina with a high of 2. Flurries also expected in Saskatoon tomorrow with a high of 0. And then Winnipeg will be seeing a high of -2 with some scattered clouds. Now, as we look further east, we're going to be seeing lots of showers over here in Ontario. Possibility of rain in Toronto with a high of 6 degrees, high of 5 expected in Ottawa, and Montreal as well with a high of 4 degrees. A mix of sun and cloud there, and some of those areas are going to be seeing freezing rain overnight too, so let's be aware of that. Fredericton's high tomorrow 13 degrees, but they could see some rain. Halifax a high of 9. Charlottetown will be seeing a high of 8 degrees tomorrow, also with a chance of showers, and it will be snowing tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland. So there you go. Weather kind of all over the place for this beginning into March. There you go, how that is your weather.
The Canola Council of Canada says action is needed as the anniversary of the China canola dispute approaches. The council is calling on Ottawa to resolve the dispute and to support industry diversification efforts. It says the feds need to do more to reopen market access to China and increase the use of biofuels to help grow Canada's economy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Canola seed exports to China were down around 70% last year due to trade disruptions. That translated to a $1 billion loss in revenue. It is widely believed that China restricted imports of Canadian canola in retaliation for Canada's arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Wireless networks company Nokia is getting a new CEO. The company says Pekka Lundmark will take on the role as of September 1st. He takes over from Rajiv Suri, who was with Nokia for 25 years. Lundmark is currently the president and CEO of the Finnish energy company Fortum. Nokia says Suri had previously told the board he was considering stepping down from his role at some point, provided a solid succession plan was in place. Dozens of approved oil sands projects could be built in the wake of the Frontier oil sands mine being shelved last week. Phil Skolnick of 8 Capital says the Frontier application withdrawal means existing producers with approved projects have a decided advantage over new entrants. Skolnick says developers of smaller projects have a leg up on open pit mining projects because they can make money with lower oil prices and usually only need provincial approvals. Federal Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson says around 2.7 million barrels per day of oil sands growth is planned or under construction. That amount could lead to emissions higher than regulation limits. The Alberta government is providing a $100 million loan to help with cleaning up abandoned oil wells in the province. The loan will go to the Orphan Well Association, which is decommissioning more than 1,000 oil wells. The extra funds will also help to create 500 direct and indirect jobs in the oil services sector. Premier Jason Kenney says the loan is part of the province's blueprint for jobs. Kenney says this taxpayer investment will create good-paying jobs while also improving the environment. China's manufacturing plunged last month as anti-coronavirus controls shut down the world's second largest economy. Surveys, however, say companies are confident activity will revive following government stimulus efforts. Global stock markets have tumbled more than 10% since mid-February amid fears the outbreak could turn into a pandemic. A number of surveys suggest Chinese factory activity fell to its lowest level on record as anti-coronavirus efforts closed factories and disrupted supplies. Now, here's a look at today's markets, which have rebounded nicely today. On the markets today, the TSX was up 290 points to 16,553. The Dow was up almost 1,300 points to 26,703. The S&P 500 was up 136 points to 3,090. And the NASDAQ was up almost 385 points on the day to 89.52. Oil was up $2.76 to 47.52 per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to $1.76. Gold was down 33 cents to 15.89.11 an ounce, and silver was down a cent to 16.73 an ounce. Wheat is at $225 per metric ton, barley's at $222, canola's at $4.58, and corn is at $258 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $2.58 to $110.15. Feeder cattle were up $2.45 to $133.73. Lean hogs were up 53 cents to $62.80. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.04 US. We have some breaking news for you this hour. Lethbridge Police seized and safely destroyed 2 live mortar rounds at the supervised consumption site and Galt Gardens over the weekend. The explosive disposal unit was called in to deal with an active 82mm mortar round. Canadian military explosive ordnance disposal technicians assisted the LPS to destroy the rounds. An investigation is ongoing to determine who placed the mortars at the SCS and Galt Gardens. Fracking, it's a term that frightens many people as their concerns of the practice potentially causing earthquakes. A senior fellow from the Fraser Institute will discuss some of the misconceptions surrounding fracking next. Catch the interview with Robert Murphy and BCN's Paul Arthur coming up. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here is your Bridge City News community calendar. Do you have a heart to serve our community? Streets Alive Mission is looking for volunteers to help serve hot meals, assist with Foot Friday, and help sort incoming donations. Visit streetsalive.ca to fill out their volunteer application or call 403-320-1159. Looking for a fun place where you and your kids can play? Come for a fun family night to the Family Center in downtown Lethbridge, Thursday evenings from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Me and My Family promotes learning through play and provides a safe place for kids to explore through physical activity, imagination, and creativity. For more information, visit famcenter.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Fracking in the oil and gas sector has been getting some negative attention over the last number of years, with complaints that this poses a risk to water quality, air quality, the health of our ecosystem. Our guest today has done a study on this. Robert Murphy is a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute think tank. So welcome to Bridge City News, Robert.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
You bet. Fracking, certainly a contentious issue, even in the U.S. presidential election these days. Leading Democrat candidate Senator Bernie Sanders says if he's elected, he would ban it nationwide. Some of the other candidates saying similar things. So, Robert, can you explain for our viewers in layman's terms what exactly is fracking, and also what are the economic benefits that this practice brings?
Well, sure. So actually, what people usually mean by fracking actually involves 2 separate things. So it's hydraulic fracturing, which is where the term fracking comes from. And that means just injecting water and other chemicals down into the ground and like into the pores between rocks to sort of open them up and loosen them up to allow the natural gas and oil to flow to the surface more easily. But the other technique that has been applied with is what's called horizontal drilling. And so those 2 things in conjunction are what has allowed what's we refer to now as like the boom in fracking. And so the benefits are just that it allows for producers in Canada and the United States to access more of the natural resources that are available there. Just to give an example, in Canada, the recent estimates show that of the marketable resources of natural gas, just over 70% are developed in terms of unconventional ones. And so the idea being that there's more than, if you're looking at natural gas in Canada with fracking, it effectively more than doubles the amount that could be brought to market. So that's just to show, again, just the tremendous potential there from using this technique.
Yeah, that's very significant. You do the math on that for sure. So fracking, there are some definite economic benefits, but also potentially there's some risks involved with this as well. What is the history, I guess, of the complaints we receive about fracking? When did that start?
Well, I mean, right when it began, I think when it started, the boom in fracking took off. Some environmental groups, of course, began raising concerns. In the United States, I know that probably around 2012 is when it became a really big issue because Matt Damon, some of your viewers might know, he was in a movie, The Promised Land, that featured people that were victimized by big oil companies coming in and drilling, and then that things didn't go well. So I would say in terms of just the public awareness and what put this on the radar, that probably from 2012 onward, it seemed to be that people who were against climate change and are very concerned in those things, that fracking to them became a very serious issue.
Okay, and to be sure, again, there are some risks, so we'll take a look at some of those here. Now, you break it down into 4 myths, and so let's get started with that, I guess. Myth number 1, and that is that fracking causes earthquakes. So yes or no? What do you say on that one?
So sure. So if what you mean by an earthquake is just a seismic event, then yes, it does do that. Because what you're doing is it's pumping water at high velocity, down to the ground, and depending on where you are in the state of the ground underneath, that can cause readjustments. So it is true. Some of the studies will show that, yep, certain regions in the United States where fracking really took off, there's a lot more measured seismic events that they think are induced by the human activity. But then that term earthquake, I think, can be misleading, right? People have the idea that buildings are falling down. There has not been a single death in the United States attributed to an earthquake caused by fracking. Most of these things are very minor. In many cases, people might not even know that it happened. So they can detect it, but again, it's not as if bridges are falling down. So I think the term earthquake might be misleading, but yes, strictly speaking, by pumping the water and down there, they can disturb some of the motion.
Right, but we're not talking, again, like you say, something that causes fatalities. And would you say in most cases then that these seismic events, slight tremors, I don't know what level they measure them at, calculate them at, but most people wouldn't even notice. Would that be correct?
I think that's a fair statement to say. The other thing too is, regardless of the degree of severity, that it's not fracking per se that causes it. That the latest research suggesting that if they just change the techniques, like as to how rapidly they pump the water in or the depth to which they pump it down in terms of the wastewater disposal, that could solve the problem. So again, it is an issue, but right now it's not as if there's significant damage. Like I say, there's no fatalities that have been attributed to it. And again, it's not that, oh yeah, we either have to choose fracking or this. It's you could continue to use these techniques to bring more natural gas to market and just change the way that they get rid of the wastewater.
Right. Again, you have to measure that risk-benefit ratio, right? And now, would it be appropriate then for the government or the industry to put tighter regulations in place then for how they dispose of the wastewater?
Well, sure. So just to be clear, what I did in the study for the Fraser Institute is I just summarized the literature in terms of what the risks were. The one thing I'm very comfortable in saying is the outright provincial bans, like in Quebec and New Brunswick. I think that's overkill, right? And the analogy I would just use is driving a car has risks, but if provinces just banned cars altogether, that would clearly be the wrong thing to do. Now, when it comes to what should they do in response, again, it depends on costs and benefits. So certainly what the literature shows, and as our discussion continues, I'll give you more specifics as to things they could do to minimize the impact. And I remain agnostic as to, is this just something industry should comply with, or local governments enforcing it? A part of the problem is just there's different regulations in place, and I didn't want to weigh in on who should do what. I just want to summarize what the academic literature says about what the risks are and how to deal with it.
Okay. And I was reading here, ironically to me, that carbon capture and storage, due to the large net volumes of the injected fluids, may have potential for inducing larger seismic events. That's interesting.
Right, yeah, because again, it's the same principle that how could it be that human activity is going to cause an earthquake? It's, well, if we're injecting stuff down deep, and it might disturb the rocks that are, on how they sit on each other, and they might move. So yes, the some of the proposals for carbon capture and storage, yeah, it's capturing the CO2 as it's leaving a smokestack or whatever, and then injecting it down into the ground where it's not going to contribute to climate change. And ironically, yeah, that's the same mechanism by which people are concerned about fracking.
Yeah, okay. Well, myth number 2, that is fracking threatens water quality and the availability of water as well. Now, and again, we hear the stories, right? And they're pretty cool stories. I mean, apparently this really happens. The stories of people lighting water on fire because it's mixed with methane gas. Is this because of again, fracking? Do you want to address that?
Sure. So again, with this, there are cases where there was contamination. So I don't want to misrepresent what happened to your viewers. But again, the systematic studies that we summarized in the article, and this is also too like meta studies, like reviews of the literature conducted by Canadian Council of Scientists, the U.S. EPA. They found that there's very modest risks, that there were a few cases, but relative to the number of wells that were in operation that were, using fracking techniques, it was a very small proportion. And then even in the problem cases where they did identify and say, yes, groundwater had been contaminated, for example, it wasn't, again, fracking per se. It was things like, okay, they had shallow pits where they were storing some of the wastewater and they didn't line them. And so that's how it seeped in. So it was things like that where the fix would be, okay, do a better job of lining the pits for wastewater disposal, as opposed to just, okay, we can't use fracking anymore. So the big picture conclusion is that there are risks, but it's the actual demonstrated harm was very small relative to how many operations were going, and the solution would not be to ban it outright.
So again, this is not the actual fracking, but does go, of course, hand in hand with it. So you have these shallow wells, and if they're too shallow, you're saying you have to line them properly so it doesn't leak into the groundwater here, correct? And how many people, I mean, if it isn't done properly, I mean, how many people are being affected by this? I mean, are we talking hundreds of people? Are we talking tens of thousands of people? What are we talking about here?
I can't give you a specific number because the literature is actually surprisingly vague. But again, the way they're describing it in the literature is it's very few isolated cases. Another consideration is one of the studies showed that, yes, there was high methane concentrations, but they realized that was just naturally occurring. That it's, in other words, it was a region where fracking had been going on. So again, with these things, it's a twofold process. That number one, is there problems with the water, and then is that because of the fracking or not? But again,
okay, so just to clarify, so in some of these areas, the methane that's there is not there because of the fracking. It's just there naturally, and that sometimes does actually mix with the water, and then you can set your water on fire, I guess.
Right. So I don't know if it was the case of people setting their water, but yes, and these were researchers who were skeptical of fracking, who they were surprised and said, we have to admit, these cases that we looked at, it wasn't the fracking causing it. It was just naturally, the water in this area.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, okay, it's good to differentiate there for sure. Okay, and fracking, does it use too much fresh water, right? Again, there's a concern, right, for the environment. Do we have any stats on that, whether using recycled water, as compared to fresh, what that ratio is like, to what degree are we using fresh water?
Yeah, I was trying to find a specific number for it, and I think it varies from operation to operation, and also the techniques have evolved over time, so I hesitate to give you a number. I do know, though, that there's a trade-off that, so it's true. I mean, a horizontally drilled well, just a single one, can use something like 5 million gallons of water, for example. So that's just to give you an idea. But on the other hand, even though that sounds like a huge number, compared to agriculture or electricity generation, fracking is still not a big user overall. The issue with using fresh water versus recycled is then if you use recycled water, that reduces the strain on the fresh water, but then when they're re-injecting down to get rid of it, well, then that's more problematic, right? You'd rather be using fresh water, so it's a trade-off.
Because that could then contaminate the groundwater, right? So okay, gotcha. And matter of fact, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency also did some studies on this as well, correct?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so that's a main feature that we did in the study, was just to go ahead and summarize what they did. And again, this was a 1,000+ page study that US EPA came out with, reviewing all the literature as of that day. I think it was a 2016 study. And again, they went in, they were saying, yes, there are some issues, but overall, it doesn't seem like there's widespread impacts on drinking water quality.
Okay, so some perspective needed on this for sure. All right, another myth that you address here, you call it a myth, and that is, does fracking contribute to climate change, right? And now certainly, again, we just mentioned earlier that fracking does emit methane gas, which is, again, many people would see as a problem climate-wise.
Right. Yeah. So to be clear, so this isn't the methane in the water. This is the actual gas emitting from the operations. So yes, it is true that fracking does release methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. More potent than CO2. But even on that, if you adjust for or compensate for the amount of natural gas produced, fracking operations actually reduce less methane than conventional natural gas operations. So that's one thing. But the other huge consideration is natural gas displaces coal in terms of electricity generation. In the CO2 that it releases, natural gas is much cleaner in that respect than coal is. And so I would argue on net that fracking reduces, humankind's impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions overall.
Gotcha. So a big picture, I mean, if you look at it narrowly and say, well, yes, this emits methane into the atmosphere, so therefore it's bad for the climate. But big picture, if it's taking away a much worse offender, if you will, coal, then will this actually contribute to, I guess, a positive to the whole climate change debate, right? So, yeah, I get what you're saying here. Interesting. Now, the other myth that you address is noise pollution, which is interesting. I mean, I guess if you live close by, how bad is it, the noise?
Sure. So yeah, we addressed one study that I had found recently that measured that. They went to a certain I think it was in Pennsylvania, and they went in, placed sound detection devices in homes that were located very near an operation, and they found, yep, you could, they could detect that there was operations nearby, but in terms of the volume, it was like a little bit louder than the hum of a refrigerator, but less of the volume than a normal conversation. So again, you could tell that was going on, but it was no louder than a refrigerator.
Right. So I guess if you're living really close by and you're super sensitive to sounds, could be an issue. But big picture, is it worth banning fracking over the noise concerns? That would seem, well, to me anyway, seem somewhat unreasonable. Yeah. Okay. Now, there are some provinces, you mentioned earlier, New Brunswick, Quebec, they placed some moratoriums on fracking, which is quite interesting because it's ironic when you look at what they're doing instead is importing U.S. natural gas, which is extracted from the ground through the use of fracking. So, yeah, I mean, what do you do with that? I mean, big picture is not really helping, is it?
Well, certainly not in that sense that, yeah, especially they're just getting it from somewhere else. And again, it's the idea there are risks here, but an outright ban to me just seems like it's clearly not the right solution. Again, because for each of these issues we've identified, there's ways that they can change the techniques they're using or the application of the fracking in order to minimize the risk. So an outright ban to me seems to be far too much of an overkill, especially to the extent that if climate change is the issue, because as we've said, it's fracking actually I think helps on climate change.
Very interesting. Okay. Well, we're running out of time here. So again, I mean, I know you're loath to say, well, the government should make some changes here, but as you indicated earlier, it seems that either government and or the industry need to kind of put their heads together here and maybe, adjust the regulation somewhat to make fracking safer than it currently is, correct?
Right. Yeah, I think like a list of best practices, and I should mention for all these things we mentioned, it's not that every operation is doing it. It's just there were some that were having these problems. So the ones that are being run more responsibly could be models for the others in the industry.
Right. Yeah. So we don't want to ignore the concerns, but we're saying let's get some perspective, big picture, and let's tighten things up, and we'll keep on using this to benefit the economy and even climate change, as you point out, that this can actually benefit. So, okay. Robert, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. You can read the study online at FraserInstitute.org. Robert Murphy is a senior fellow with the Fraser Institute think tank.
The
The vast majority of us love animals, and many of us have pets at home. We sometimes like to call them our fur babies. Now, do we know how to properly care for these fur babies? We asked an expert to share some advice with us today. Stephanie Bodnarchuk is a veterinarian with the Coaldale Pet Clinic. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you.
Our fur babies. Now, sometimes we have cold snaps. It's minus 30 outside. Should we really be careful about how much time we allow our pets to spend outdoors?
Definitely depends on your dog and the breed and how much they're used to being outside. If you have a big Arctic breed with a heavy coat that's used to living outside, it's almost torture to bring them inside at times. But if you have your short-coated dog that's an indoor-outdoor dog, really pay attention to them. If they're out there lifting their feet, shivering, might be time to bring them in. Not leaving them outside when you're gone for work so that you can see if they're cold is generally a good idea.
How about people that add a lot of accessories for their pets? Little sweaters, little booties for their dogs? I mean, it's more than just a fashion statement, isn't it? It's actually to protect them.
Absolutely. They definitely have their place, especially the boots. When it gets this cold, they don't want to go out and pee. Put boots on to help their feet. And dogs that are working, keeping those coats on to keep their muscles nice and warm is going to prevent injuries as well. If they get cold, tend to pull muscles easier, and just makes it easier for them to go outside for a walk without worrying about their paws freezing.
Does that kind of feel awkward for the dog, though, walking with these boots? Or they're like, what are you putting on my feet here? This is...
So it's definitely something that you want to get your dog used to. You don't want to throw boots on and ask them to go for a walk.
Right.
Put the boots on at home, give them treats, tell them it's okay, get them used to it before asking them to go out for a walk. Once they realize that those boots keep their feet warm and they can go out for longer periods, they almost look forward to having them put on.
How about a doghouse as well? Stephanie, should we make sure that it's well insulated?
Absolutely. So something that's well insulated, out of the wind, with bedding. Straw is an excellent insulating bedding, just to make sure that they're out of that driving wind and snow. If they have a big heavy coat, they're going to keep themselves pretty warm in a doghouse.
And bowls too. You have to make sure that you don't give them a metal bowl, right? If they're lapping up the water.
Yeah, so metal bowls would tend to freeze a bit faster. There's heated bowls that you can get. So heated bowls and heated water buckets are fantastic for this time of year. You don't want to think that your dog has water outside, but the bowl's frozen, they can't actually get to it. So nice plastic heated bowls are a really good idea.
How does that work when it comes to the life of a pet? They say usually 7 to 1 for the human years, right? But if they're an indoor cat, is it longer 7 to 1? An outdoor cat or dog, is it 5 to 1? Because they generally don't live as long because of the dangers and the elements outside?
It's not so much the lifestyle of the pet, but the breed. Obviously, you have more risks in an outdoor dog that's roaming, but larger breed dogs tend to be a bit more per year than smaller breed dogs. Smaller breed dogs tend to live longer.
Yeah, why is that?
Just genetics. I mean, those big dogs are so lovable, but unfortunately they have shorter lifespans.
But they're not as yappy usually as the little dogs, right?
Maybe that's why they live so long. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Now, the other thing too is I remember many years ago we had a beautiful family cat. His name was Putter. May he rest in peace. And unfortunately, he got outside and he lapped up some antifreeze and he was gone the same day.
Yeah.
It crushed our family.
Yeah.
What is it about antifreeze? Is it the sweet smell, do you think, that attracts the cats?
Yeah, so it does taste very sweet, so it's a good incentive for them to go and lap it up, but it's extremely toxic. They deposit crystals down in their kidneys. They can go into kidney failure pretty quickly from antifreeze. So if you have cold weather, if you have animals living in your shop, you're going to want to really make sure that that's cleaned up.
Yeah, absolutely, and make sure that our vehicles don't have any leaks, right? Any
For
fluid
sure.
leaks. Now, when it comes to animals and our pets, our fur babies, when we feed them during the wintertime, should we maybe ease up a little bit or feed them a little bit more so they can maybe add a little bit of the winter fat to keep them warm?
So it definitely depends on their lifestyle. If you have an indoor dog that's going for the same amount of walks, you don't necessarily need to feed them more in the winter. If you have an outdoor dog, we might want to feed them a bit more because they're going to use some calories keeping warm.
What times of the day should we actually feed our dogs?
Whatever's going to be consistent and works for your schedule. Generally breaking up into multiple feedings a day is a bit better for their metabolism. So morning and night, when you leave for work, when you get home from work is fine. If you want to add a meal at lunchtime, it's good. It's good to meal feed them instead of keeping food out all the time.
You know, it's funny too, Stephanie, I know people that as soon as they see an empty bowl in the middle of the day, it's like, well, that can't be right for Fifi or for Fluffy. Come on, let's fill it up, let's load it up. That's not necessarily a good thing, is it?
It's not. They tend to get overweight. People think that they, don't eat that much, but they tend to snack a bit too much, and I see them in for their yearly exams with, a couple extra pounds each year, and it's just not good for their joints and overall health. So definitely, if you're going to have a bowl there all day, measure what goes into that bowl in the morning.
How about milk for a cat? Aren't cats actually lactose intolerant?
As they get older, it can be a little bit hard on their stomach. You can see some looser bowel movements from drinking milk. They don't necessarily need it. If they're used to having it all the time, it's probably not going to hurt, but it does have calories and can upset their stomach. It's not essential for them to have.
When I was a volunteer board member of the SPCA in Red Deer many years ago, we used to have people bring in a lot of empty peanut butter jars for the dogs, and that was a real treat.
Yeah.
The peanut butter.
Yep.
And that's not going to harm the dogs, right?
Not at all. Just make sure there's some diet peanut butters out now that actually have xylitol in them, which can be very highly toxic. So long as it's a regular peanut butter with no artificial sweeteners in it, it's a wonderful treat, keeps them busy, keeps the mind occupied.
How about people that like to, I'm kind of guilty of this myself, spoil the dogs from the table and give them a little bit of human food? Is that a major no-no? Is that bad to do that?
Depends on what you're giving them. If you're giving them
a little bit of chicken, maybe?
A little bit of chicken
beef?
with no cooked bones. Don't give them the bone from your T-bone. It should be fine. Just make sure you're taking that into account with their daily calories.
But Steph, dogs like to gnaw on the bones. They like to chew on the bones.
They do, but unfortunately the bones tend to get stuck in places that they shouldn't, or they run the risk of actually perforating their intestines, getting stuck in their mouth. So it's something definitely cooked bones to stay away from.
Why is chocolate so toxic for pets?
So it has a compound in it called theobromide, which causes extremely high heart rate, agitation, can actually cause seizures and even death at high doses.
Wow.
Yeah, so the darker the chocolate, the more toxic it is. So your semi-sweet and dark chocolates are going to be worse than milk chocolate. And obviously, a small dose in a big dog isn't going to be as much of a concern, but if a little dog gets into some dark chocolate, that can actually be quite life-threatening.
I have friends that actually have a dog that loves vegetables.
Yeah.
You know, cucumbers and radishes. I'm like, what? And the dog just loves eating them, chewing on the crunch and so forth. So vegetables are fine?
Vegetables, for the most part, are fine. So long as it's not in huge quantities that are going to upset their stomach. Generally, not a problem with vegetables. With fruits, grapes are something that you want to watch out for. They can be quite harmful.
Or maybe get lodged?
Actually, there's a compound in it in some dogs that will actually harm their kidneys. So want to stay away from grapes.
Now, a lot of times when we go out there shopping for our foods, pet foods, we want to get something that's affordable but healthy at the same time. You know, maybe I remember with our cat, the cat had urinary tract infection, and the vet that we took our cat to said it was because of the food you're feeding your cat.
It very well can be.
You know, so how do we justify, you know, spending that much more money? I mean, we love our pets, obviously, but sometimes it can be 3 times the price.
100%.
Right?
So there's
where do you find that fine line?
Yeah, the biggest thing I look for in a food is going to be the research and development that goes behind the food. So not looking at the bright colors on the bag or you know, human grade ingredients, look at all the pretty fruits and vegetables on the front of the bag, looking at that company, how much research, feeding trials they put into it. There's pet store foods that are absolutely excellent to feed. If your cat has or dog has a specific medical condition, I would probably be listening to the veterinary advice if they need a special prescription diet. But for the vast majority of pets, just making sure it's a company that has a nutritionist on board, is doing the research development and feeding trials, and knowing that that food is formulated to be best for your pet.
Are there certain chemicals within pet foods that we should maybe steer clear from for our pets?
Not necessarily. I mean, the ingredient lists can be quite daunting at times. There's stuff in there that you don't necessarily know what it means.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. How about high sodium?
High sodium,
Is that dangerous?
for some conditions, so especially animals with heart disease, we want to stay away from high sodium foods. Consult with your veterinarian in terms of nutrition. They can help you decode those bag ingredients. Sometimes the words that they use aren't as daunting as they need to be. And again, you can get caught with the bag looks like something that I would eat, but maybe it's not necessarily the best thing for your pet.
It's funny you talk about the packaging. I remember when I was a kid going shopping with my parents and seeing all of the kiddie cereals, you know, the Fruit Loops and Captain Crunch and Cheerio, whatever, like, oh, because the packaging looks so great. It's got the cartoon animated characters on the front. You know, that's what attracts the kids.
Absolutely. That's what attracts us too.
That's right. Now, how often should we actually take our pet in to the vet for a checkup?
For most dogs and cats, a yearly checkup is perfect, just to make sure, you know, keep track of their weight, make sure that there's no lumps and bumps that have developed, if they're due for any vaccines that year. If your dog has special medical conditions or cat, you might need to see them more frequently. But generally, we recommend an annual health exam just to keep track of everything, make note of any conditions that might arise, so that we catch everything early.
So if I'm thinking of adopting a pet, I want to adopt a dog, let's say, maybe a puppy. How do I want to make sure that this puppy's a good fit for my family and that I'll be a good fur parent to this dog?
So absolutely do your research. You can adopt a dog from a shelter is wonderful, or getting a dog from a reputable breeder. Just knowing that this is a dog that's going to fit your lifestyle.
Because it might be a hyper dog, right?
Absolutely.
It needs to be ran quite a bit.
Yep. If you have a really active lifestyle, you might want to get a more active breed or an active mix. If you maybe have a bit more of a sedentary lifestyle, maybe consider adopting a senior animal. But really doing your research, not falling for that first cute puppy or kitten, making sure that that's going to be a good fit for your lifestyle, and that's going to be the best chance that that dog's going to stay with you for its entire life, and everybody's going to be happy with that pet, and just take away that stress if maybe it's not a good fit.
Again, when I volunteered at the shelter there in Red Deer, I remember we received a lot of Dalmatians. Shortly after 101 Dalmatians came out, and then people realized these may not be the best family pets.
So
that's a danger too, isn't it?
Absolutely. We'll see these breed hypes come up. I know this year we had a lot of movies that came out with sled dogs, and a Siberian Husky is not going to be a dog for everybody. They're wonderful if you have an active lifestyle, or Babe came out and everybody wants a Border Collie.
Right.
You really have to, not look at that cute dog that's really well trained on the silver screen and
or Russell
think,
Terrier, like when Frasier was popular.
absolutely,
that TV show, right?
absolutely. Just know that those dogs are impeccably well trained, and know what kind of training goes in to get them to be that well behaved.
I guess you have to focus and consider as well on your allergies too.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of dander involved with a pet, and they shed quite a bit. That could be a factor as well.
For sure. So some dogs that are less shedding might be less allergenic. The best thing to do, you can't guarantee that any dog is going to be hypoallergenic, but visit the kennel, visit the parents of the dogs if you can, and see if you react. That's going to be the best judge of whether you might react to those puppies or not.
Because I know a lot of times the breeds that have the poodle mix in with them, like the golden doodle, the labradoodle, is usually better for people who have allergies, or maybe a Morkie, like the Maltese and the Yorkie. That's usually a little bit better as well, right?
It's not a guarantee. They might take more after the golden retriever side and might be a little more shedding. You really can't guarantee it. So again, just visiting the kennel, playing with the puppies. If you're playing with the cute puppy and your eyes are watering and nose is running, it might not be the best suited pick for you. You can't guarantee any one dog to be hypoallergenic.
What's the difference then, Stephanie, between hair and fur?
So dogs with fur tend to shed, so they'll be your double-coated breeds. Dogs with hair, more like your poodles, Yorkies, that need grooming. The hair isn't going to fall out, so they need regular grooming and trimming to keep control of that coat. With a golden doodle, you're going to have a mix of hair and fur.
Oh.
So it depends on which one they take after.
And which actually has more dander? Is it the long-haired pets or the short-haired pets? Especially when it comes to cats.
Yeah, you're going to have more volume of hair coming off of a long-haired animal, but the dander isn't necessarily determined by the length of the coat. Shedding breeds are going to obviously have a bit more that stays around your house, but you can have just as much dander from a long-haired breed as a short-haired breed.
How about parasites? How dangerous are they to our dogs and cats?
So parasites can be quite troublesome to our dogs and cats. External parasites can cause hair loss, itching, tick-borne diseases can be a problem. Internal parasites, sometimes we don't notice that the dog has them, or cat. The only way to know is to get a fecal sample, look under the microscope, see if you're seeing parasites in eggs. One of the most concerning things is actually human health concerns with parasites. So dog and cat roundworms can transfer to children, immunocompromised people. They're actually one of the leading causes of preventable blindness in the developing world. And there's a new parasite it's emerging in Alberta called Echinococcus multilocularis, and it actually causes...
Say that again?
Echinococcus multilocularis.
That's a mouthful, wow.
It is, and it's emerging and actually quite frightening because it causes these cysts that can actually look like liver or brain tumors on CT scan. There was actually a woman diagnosed in Alberta a couple weeks ago, and that is very concerning because we won't know that our dog and cat has it until we get sick.
Wow, that's incredible.
So regular deworming is very important for both our pet and our health.
What about when it comes to spay or neutering? What age should we bring our pets in to have that done?
So I think it's a really good conversation to have with your vet because it's going to depend on the size of your dog as well as the lifestyle. If we don't want the dog having puppies, we might want to get it spayed before that first heat, so in that 6 to 8, 9 month range. There may be cases if you have a giant breed dog and the lifestyle warrants it that you might want to keep them intact a little bit longer just to get that bone and joint development. or some of these canine athletes, we might want to keep them intact a little bit longer, just to let them develop a bit more. Most of your everyday pets generally fine to spay before that first heat. Saves on the mess, saves the risk of an accidental pregnancy, which happens way more than people think it would.
Let's talk about declawing. It's now illegal here in Alberta for our viewers in
It's-
Alberta. I'm not sure about many of the other provinces around the country, but why is declawing such a nasty thing to do to a pet?
So people think that they're just taking the nail off the cat. It is essentially akin to taking your finger off at the last knuckle. So it is quite a big surgery. It affects how that cat moves. It can affect its scratching behavior. Some cats, if they were scratching before, might switch to biting. And I've seen pain and arthritis post-declawing. So it's something that I'm not too upset is no longer allowed. As long as we do appropriate training and have...
Trim those nails, right?
Trim the nails, get them a good scratching post, a nice, tall, sturdy place to scratch, that they're comfortable scratching, maybe not get after your furniture. It's a much better alternative.
Sydney Bodnar-Chuck, a veterinarian with the Coaldale Pet Clinic, thanks so much for coming in today.
Not a problem at all, my pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.